As an industry, I don't think plugins are going to make it to the future because I think that DAWs are not going to make it to the future. I think those people, their first experience, if you think about it, their first experience with producing music or writing music or creating is through prompts and these kind of new ways of making music.
This podcast is produced by Amplitude Ventures, your partner in early stage startups.
Today on Sound Connections, we're joined by Noam Levinberg, founder of Safari Audio, to explore how AI is changing music software, why anyone may soon be able to build their own plugins, and what that means for the future of the tools producers depend on. Noam, we've talked a few times before, and I'll jump straight into this conversation. You said yourself that you're an open book when it comes to these conversations. So I'm looking very much forward, Noam, to talk about you and your company, Safari Audio. But welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we had a conversation, I believe, last week or a week before that, where you said something incredibly interesting, and I don't think we'll start there. Is when you talk about the relevance of plugin companies presently and then in the future. Just to set the context, with plugins in the music world, obviously that's been a big thing since digitalization. I would say, really the last 30 years. But plugins are still very relevant today, and big businesses or pursuits are being built on plugins for DAWs. Um, but you've built a very interesting new one, well, newish Safari Audio. And when I talked with one of my friends, Hannes Andersson, which I consider one of the most brilliant minds in the plugin space, he referenced to Safari Audio as the company. But Noam, you also said that you don't know if plugins will be as relevant in a few years. Um, Maybe let's start there, and then people actually get an introduction to what you do as well. But I think that was a really interesting conversation starter.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think in general, if we zoom out for a second and you know look at everything that's happening in terms of tech these days, I'm one of those people that believe that everything's changing in a rapid pace, and I don't think we're going to see the same types of businesses and companies moving forward as we did in the past. And specifically, in our industry and as a user of plugins, I've been using plugins as a user, as a mixing engineer and mastering engineer for many, many years since kind of it all started um, in terms of plugins. And they definitely do not possess the same, necessities as they were in the past. And I think, if we look back into like kind of the progression and history of plugins and music software in general, it started by, replacing very obvious tools, the first versions of Pro Tools and everything. Um, that was just a tape recorder in the computer or a tape machine in the computer. Then, there were DSP processors, and all of a sudden you can EQ a sound and recall that EQ without twisting knobs, which was insane. And then, that kind of framework of what a plugin is or what we use it for kind of persisted till now in the sense that, we still treat a lot of these things as necessary tools. But a few things really changed over the course of, the last like 15 years or 20. A, the DAWs, the workstations became way better. Like when I started on Pro Tools, we had EQ7. That was it in terms of EQs, and it was okay. I mean, I used it on a lot of records, but it wasn't great. And then net looking like comparing that to now, these DAWs have amazing built-in processing power, as well as free plugins that they offer. So that's one big change, and then I think the other big change is the fact that building plugins isn't that complicated anymore. I mean, we're able to do now with a very small team of people what used to be, a huge task or a huge, mountain to climb in terms of digital signal processing. And it's not only us, it's everyone. I mean, everyone can now build plugins, especially, adding fuel to the fire, AI, and the fact that you can now vibe code your plugins. And just the other day, like I think it was 3 days ago, a really talented producer showed me 5 plugins that he built with Claude Code, and they sounded amazing. I was like, okay, uh, if he can do it with no code and get it to a point where it sounds just as good as a plugin that was built with developers, then I'm 100% certain that you know um, moving forward, this industry is definitely going to change and maybe even not exist.
Okay, interesting conversation starter. We'll get back to that. Let's just go back 1 second and set the scene for who you are, Noam. Um, could you explain who you are, what you do, and what Safari Audio does?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am first and foremost a music lover. Um, I've been mixing records for about 20 years now, and started kind of my way into this world of music creation through big studios. So I was really lucky, um, got a chance to go through kind of the old way of doing, you know, mixing or engineering, which is started as a intern, then assistant, then kind of became a recording engineer, then a mixing engineer. So really saw kind of the ladder that used to exist and now kind of doesn't. But did a lot of projects in Israel, where I'm based, and then traveled the world. Did stuff in the UK, US, Australia, Asia, and about 7 years ago, I joined a company called Artlist. They do content for video creators. Really amazing company. And my wife always jokes that that's kind of where I um, did my university, kind of, because I didn't study anything, but that was I worked at Artlist as head of audio for 4 years, and that's really where I learned, all my business skills, things like how to run a team, how to run budget, um, and also kind of taught me um, in many ways that if you go Artlist's story, and we'll get to Safari in a second, but like their story is a bunch of founders that were users of different products and wanted to kind of build a product that would suit their needs. And in many ways, I did the same. I feel with Safari, which is I am a plugin user or plugin addict, call it whatever you want, but I use hundreds of different plugins, and I always had dreams and ideas of like, oh, if only this plugin could do that, um, and so at some point, after working at Artlist, I decided to jump ship and start my own thing, and I started Safari 3 years ago, bootstrapped, no funding. And fast forward to now, we have 170,000 users. Um, we're a team of 9 people, really talented. I'm lucky to, be with these amazing people. And we try and make fun plugins.
Hmm. And I think what's what's really interesting about Safari Audio is you've again, from an outsider's perspective, it's almost like brand first. I know, the quality of the plugins are obviously vastly important, but, for people listening to this, you can go and sort of look at the website, but it's super fun, super engaging. So what's been your thought process about building a company in, let's say, a less traditional way, when it comes to that aspect?
Yeah, good question. I think honestly, if to answer the question as honest as I can, I didn't think Safari would become a company per se. I looked at it as, you know, a personal project that I thought would probably allow me to make a living. That was kind of my initial approach was like, maybe I could do this thing, build plugins and, you know, support myself and my family. Um, but then, it's kind of like it's funny to say, but it's kind of like playing a game where, a lot of times uh you'll play whatever, like some video game, and some people enjoy the first, phase of the game, but then other people are, get increasingly into, the process of how do I go to the next step, go to the next step, go to the next step, and that was kind of my experience with Safari. I felt like, uh, it was kind of step by step, it was becoming a company, and step by step, I was all of a sudden being asked like, "What is the company's goal?" Or like, "Where do you see the company in 5 years?" And suddenly it became something real. Um, so I didn't plan it at first, but then it kind of grew and grew up to a point where it did feel real. And fast forward to now, we definitely do have goals and plans for the next few years. Um, and I think what you said about a fun brand, that's kind of our angle in general in this in this industry is and that's what I identified before starting Safari was all the brands looked at mixing and music production as something very serious. All the ads and all the images of all the plugins were always focused around this like seriousness of like the best compressor, the most linear EQ, or like the cleanest something. And as a mixing engineer, I was kind of turned off by that because I felt like, when I started Safari in 2023, there was an abundance of that, but I still have analog gear in the studio, and the reason I do is because I'm looking for not like the best or the cleanest, but I'm looking for something maybe inspirational or a little dirty or something that kind of does something that I didn't expect it to do. Um, so I was leaning into that aspect of music production and mixing. I was like, that this should be fun. I mean, we're making music. We're not selling products to neural surgeons, you know? Uh, so the fun is I wanted to not only have it, exist in the products as audio, but I also wanted it to be represented in the visualization of how the products look and feel.
Mhm. And, you've carried it through also in the digital marketing and, marketing a website and how it's engaging and, um, you know, I'm not the best at these sort of cultural sort of words, but it feels more Gen Z. It feels more relevant to a younger sort of, audience, maybe someone who's the next generation. Is that something you've done on purpose or?
Yeah, so I definitely wanted to tailor it to the like next generation of music producers and people that make music. I don't know if I succeeded, if I'm honest, because if we look at our demographic, there definitely are um, you know younger generation users in our user base, but still a very big percentage of our user base are people kind of my age with my experience of, people that it's funny because I focus the products to appeal to a younger generation, but in the end, I think a lot of people that are my age, which is like, close to 40, um, look at these plugins and say like, "Oh, I already have all the necessities of, uh, OX sound and Fab filter and all the stuff that I need. These are fun." So I'm gonna grab some of Safari's plugins because they're inspiring, because they're fun to use, etc. Um, and that demographic of people that are older tend to have also a little bit more of a budget. So I think that's kind of why it
Mm.
worked out pretty well.
An interesting question I think might be is, how much is actually needed? I can argue, and it's been a while since I did mixing, but that was most of my life at one point, and I recognize there are some things that are like must-haves. Again, OX Sound and Sooth became a must-have, right? And the FAP filters and the way that they approached it, sort of borderline must-haves. But it's still most plugins are still like an excuse for must-have. They're not actually must-have. There are more fun or ego or I don't know what it is. Um, so do you think that's just an extension of that, and then they can more easily just plug their fingers that this is something fun, or
So it's a really interesting conversation because that's something that I think about a lot. Is like because I so let me go back for a second. When I was mixing and traveling, there was one time I was traveling. I was in the UK tracking a record, and I got uh, an email about mixing an EP, and it was like really um, on a tight deadline. So I didn't have time to go back to the studio, and I wanted to mix it when I was there. And at the time, this was like 12 years ago. I had a laptop, but the laptop didn't have all the plugins that I used to have on the studio's computer. And so at at night in the hotel, I tried to download all the stuff that I needed, and I just remember this feeling of like um, there were things in there that uh, I had replacements of, but I was very much used to the process of working with a specific tool. So an example for that is SSL channel strip. So for some reason, I on my laptop, I remember having, I think it was the G series from Waves, but I was used to using the E. And it's a small difference, right? You could argue that in the, in general terms, sure, they're different, but like they're kind of the same flavor. Um, and I remember like being really disappointed in myself and not being able to kind of get the drum sound that I wanted with the uh, G instead of the E. Um, and I think that's like just going back to the conversation. I think that's the thing. It's like we all get used to certain workflows, and those workflows become our must-haves. Um, so I think it's very much workflow dependent, and you know maybe I don't know if this is true, but like maybe some of the Safari stuff became must-haves or will become must-haves for some producers for a certain workflow. But for me, I kind of feel like, and this also like applies, I think, to anybody who's producing and recording and mixing, is like you get to a point where these plugins become sort of like some plugins become just an extension of like what you're used to hearing and how you're used to processing it.
Hmm.
Um,
One of the things with these must-haves, uh, is generally speaking, unless you buy them outright, um, there's a retention to it or the brand around it, right? So if you have, a certain plugin type, let's say universal audio, for example, and you're very dedicated to those sounds and those plugins, like you're usually like a repeat customer, because your favorite plugins, if that's a pull tech or whatever it is, you come back for other products of that provider, and that in itself provides a higher lifetime value. So how do you see that with your current customers? Like, is there still repeat purchases? Is there loyalty to the brand and sort of products in association with those products they buy? Like, how do customers actually act around that?
Yeah, we have really high loyalty. I it's hard for me to compare to other companies because I don't have 10 plugin companies to compare, all the data, but in general, about 70% of people that purchase a first product will purchase a second one on Safari. Um, I think there's many reasons for that. The main one being we focus on building small products, so each product does one thing and we release a lot of them. So there's a new release coming out every month. So I think that if you find a cool compressor that's l- in the shape of a pedal appealing, then you probably find a weird reverb in the shape of a pedal appealing as well. So I think we do have, a bunch of people that are our core audience that come back multiple times to purchase plugins, but I don't think that is necessarily, you know, um, a kind of a um, direct connection to are these plugins must-haves because, like, take for example, you know, uh so you gave the UAD example as you know as something, and this is just for me personally. Um, I mean I have all the UADs stuff. I think I have like an ultimate bundle or something, but I never actually um put the UAD line of plugins in my kind of must have bucket in my brain because at the time when I was like in the process of mixing as a career, I always felt like I don't want to depend on something that's you know DSP based on like a hardware because that was before they came out with Spark and all that native plugins. And what I'm trying to say is like sometimes the must have versus nice to have arguments get won over by things that you wouldn't expect, like um, what other people have or what a producer or engineer feels like the pros are using, all kinds of things that are non, you know, product related per se, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
And to sort of take the conversation a tiny bit back to where we started, um, these psychological considerations or consumer behavior considerations of running a plugin company obviously will be, change confronted with the change of AI in general right now. I think a good analogy to this is I'll take Suno, even though it's not really related. But if you look at, for example, Suno version 3 versus what they have now, and when it comes to sort of the audio processing, that there might be a lot of things going on behind the brain that I don't know of. But in its poor, outside analysis, like the sound quality, the mixing, the mastering, a year ago on Suno has fundamentally changed. We actually now have outputs from AI generated music that has high audio quality when it comes to sort of how it's supposed to sound in a mixed and mastered sense. And if I sort of try to take that analogy and put it into other types of sort of fundamental models or machine learning models or cloud based, sort of processing, I'm sure there can be a lot of very high quality intelligent processing that will, conflict with um, with plugins, especially those of a more surgical nature, more of a coloring nature, rather than sort of primary creative expression. Um, what's your thoughts about that?
So I think I think there's like stages to kind of the AI revolution in our field. Um and I think people don't fully understand uh how many like different angles AI can uh affect, you know, uh plugin creation. And what I mean by that is like for like a really insane example that uh is very new to us, like as of yesterday, is we use product we use a platform called Blender for 3D rendering of knobs and other things. And we found out that Gemini now creates these amazing uh 3D renders if you prompt it the right way. And so all of a sudden you can design like a two-dimensional knob, let's say in Figma, which is another design tool. Very, very basic design. Like you could just draw a circle and maybe, decide on how exactly you want the knob to, you know, look in terms of dimensions, etc. You can export that, stick it in Gemini and say, make this a 3D designed, knob, make it look vintage or new or all these um, descriptions, and all of a sudden, you don't need to spend 6 hours on building and rendering knob design in Blender. And the reason I bring that example is because like these little things all add up. And so I kind of feel like this is how I felt even like way before the AI thing was like in the news, and way before um like when I just started Safari. I was told by kind of the developers that I spoke to, in general, like very, I'm making it a general conversation, but like in general, I was told, look, there's Juice. That's for people who don't know, that's like the platform that most plugin developers use to build the plugins. That's a framework for coders. There's Juice. Juice has all this DSP in it that is very basic. And then the more professional developers build, their own DSP for whatever EQs, compressors, distortions, limiters, etc. Um, kind of like, it was sounding to me as a non-developer, it was sounding like people said, look, there's like EQ7 from Pro Tools. It's an EQ, but it's not really that great. And if you compare it to FabFilter Pro Q, as an engineer, you should use that. Don't use the EQ7. Um, but then going back to kind of the discussion about AI, that thing doesn't really exist anymore because you can build insane algorithms with Cloud Code or Cursor or anything, and the plugins that come out of it will definitely sound good. And not only that, I think what I was trying to say earlier is that I think there's a very big misconception in this industry in general is like I don't think the kind of algorithm part of plugins is that big of a deal. I think the bigger deal is what you make out of it. So, um, our whole thing with Safari is like I want to be able to twist a knob and not have it linear. I want it to mimic something that I have in my head that I'm imagining, and that doesn't really involve complicated, algorithms. That involves just being creative,
Hmm.
and thinking, about sound in a specific way.
I think that's in general, I think the intent of what you're building matters more and more now, and the actual execution becomes easier. And that's not something that sort of AI in general captures really well. Like, what is the intention of this? Like, and obviously, since they don't necessarily have a sense of what's going on, other than it's zeros and ones. Um, but one of the things I hear a lot from the startup community, um, especially for people who are sort of on the more forward-leaning side of it, is that the actual technology, the actual building is becoming less important, and distribution is becoming the new thing. Like it's, if everyone can build something fairly great, then it's sort of an equal playing field when it comes to quality. Not really, but let's just assume it's at least more equal than it used to be. But now getting it in front of the right people that are willing to pay for it is going to be, probably the biggest priority. How do you think about distribution?
Yeah, it's a really, really good point, and I'm one of those people. Like I feel that way. But here's the catch. I think. I think the catch is I'll answer the distribution part in a second, but I think the catch is it's kind of like a cat and mouse. So you can obviously have the best marketing in the world. If your product is not good, then it doesn't help. Uh, and vice versa, right? Like you can have the best product in the world if you don't do any marketing, no one's gonna hear about it. But I think that in our industry, it's kind of leaning more into the product. So you could get away with like a way better product and not a great distribution system. You can't get away with having like an amazing distribution system and a really bad product. Uh, there's examples of that. I won't like name names because I don't want to, you know, be negative about any brand. But there's examples of products from both sides, like products that Valhalla, for example, as a good example. That um, almost no marketing. I don't know if they do any marketing, you know, and everybody uses their product. So I think that's where like because music software and audio is a very small market, and a very kind of niche community, people will find the good products because they're looking for them, as opposed to an industry like, I don't know, like plumbing or something. Like, do I necessarily care? Of course, I want a good service from the person that's doing the plumbing for me, but I'm not like spending my days on plumbing websites and like comparing between, like, you know what I mean?
Mm.
So I think that like other types of industries is where, in my opinion, like distribution is in many ways almost the only thing that matters now. Uh, another example for it is like Jira. Everybody uses Jira. Um, we had some issues with using Jira. Like we use Jira, but recently, like a month ago, we started using our own vibe coded version of Jira, and we had discussions internally, and it's a great product. Like we love using our own system. It does a lot of things that Jira doesn't. Um, Am I going to, make a product out of it and sell it? Probably not, because I think that to play in that game of like, marketing to that broad of an audience and competing with world champion, marketeers and distribution systems, I'm not going to, you know, win in that game, I feel.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes 100% sense. For me, when I talk with sort of colleagues outside of music, because music seems to be like its own beast sometimes and maybe a bit introspective, but when I talk with founders working in a broader context of industries, we talk about digital marketing being the new thing. And it kind of sounds a bit ironic because, okay, well, marketing has been accessible and available for a long time, and now with sort of AI tooling, it's more accessible on how to do good copy and all that kind of stuff. But there's two aspects to it. One is traditional speed of digital marketing, adaptation, analyzing data, and sort of converting that is too slow in the traditional way. But then also there's all these underutilized distribution of great products. I've been speaking with a bunch of plugin founders lately, just because I'm quite intrigued, and we just started working with one company out of Spain. Because for me, one of the most overlooked opportunities in the audio music world is legacy plugin software that just hasn't been distributed well. And
Mm.
you would be surprised. I was speaking with one company out of Germany, and maybe to my own fault, I was like looking at their data. I signed an NDA. I looked into the data and say, okay, why don't you do this? That was just a basic question, and obviously this founder was smart, went and did that, and they 5x their revenue. I was just like, oh,
Or
I should have said that. Like I should have kept that to myself and made a deal. But it was interesting that a legacy company could basically just do one actionable insight they haven't really thought about, and then make a lot of money really fast because their product, was amazing and has been for 10 years. So there is a product market fit. There is an audience, and what they just didn't have was distribution. And I think that's the really interesting part about this. If you can nail both, I think there is not necessarily a moat to be built, but I think that's a way to build a business now. But obviously knowing how to build both quality and also distribution is a different skill set entirely, and not too many founders know how to equip both. Um,
I agree. I think also doing both is tricky. Like I feel like looking into like, I'm not objective about Safari, but I feel like we're okay with both. Like we're not great in either, but we're kind of okay with both. And I'm not sure if that's better than, just excelling extremely, like doing really great in one of the two.
yeah, I don't have an answer either. We've mentioned OXAuth a few times, but I used them as an example. Like Hannes, who's the current CEO and was part of the early team there. Um, they consciously, I think, for 4 or 5 years, did not do any digital marketing, or just very, very light touch, because they were product first. They spent years building a product, and obviously, when that came out, they just sent it to great producers, and that endorsement in itself was enough to get the ball rolling. Obviously, they do in digital marketing now, but they had a very specific strategy of like let the product be the best in the world, and that's what we carry by. But that's a very one-off type situation in most
Yeah,
cases, right?
it's also like I'm not sure looking at OX Sound because it's such a good example, I feel. I remember when Soothe came out, and I don't think I mean like first impression of Soothe was okay, this is different, interesting, unique. Not necessarily I wouldn't put it in the must-have category right off the bat, you know. Now, I mean, it's one of the maybe like 3 must-haves that like, any producer or engineer really needs, including myself. I mean, I don't see myself mixing or mastering without Soothe. Um, but what I'm trying to say is like it's very hard to determine that early on. Like they took a very big bet that might have come out. in a negative way too. Uh, and I don't think that's like a real like I don't mean to disrespect you or but I don't think that's a strategy I would go for as a young company because I feel like that's much higher risk, than a strategy where it's like we did the exact opposite. So when I came out with Sapphire, I was like, I want to put out a lot of products. Mainly, I mean, I had a lot of ideas of products, but also mainly because I wanted to see what people like and don't like, and react quickly to whatever feedback that we get. And we evolved the products over time based on a lot of user feedback, like, oh, we want this, we don't want that. This worked extremely well in this product, etc. And I don't think we could have, done that growth without that strategy. And also, I think we made a lot of mistakes and we got away with them because, if you spend a month building a product, it doesn't work out. It sucks, but it's not the end of the world. If you spend 4 years and it doesn't work out, then you're probably closing the company.
Oh, that's for sure. Like I've definitely fell into the trap of I've been always been a distribution first kind of guy. But I've most of my life missed the quality part, which has been its own type of issue, which I'm working on, and I think I've sort of to some degree solved now. Um, but what I've come to realize, what I believe is currently the best version of the strategy. This might change. Is that there's this initial pursuit of quality, and then you start with distribution really to inform where the quality should take it. So it's sort of it's parallel, and the distribution is basically your market research. But still, it's a pursuit of quality, but you need to have parallel distribution in order to iterate quickly. And I think that's what the world is open up for a possibility right now that you can do. And maybe that's also what a sense in what you guys are doing. Like there's this parallel pursuit of understanding the market, building for the market, then going deeper into it. And you also come into something in our last talk that maybe you can explain about what do you think is the next, stage for Safari? If you look 5 years ahead and you want to position yourself to still be relevant there, how do you believe your company would look like? And maybe even the plugging in industry.
I think that 5 years now is like 15 or 20 years in the past, just because of AI.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
uh, so it's really hard to say. I think there's a few paths that we're looking into to going to, and it's an interesting period of time too, because on Thursday this week we have a whole day of like strategizing for next year. Um, and there are things we need to kind of decide on which path we are going to. I think y- you know first to answer, not Safari, but like as an industry, I don't think plugins are going to make it to the future because I think that DAWs are not going to make it to the future. Uh, my guess or my vision or my, assumption of what's going to happen is I think we're already seeing, Suno is reporting they have 250 million users coming into Suno. Moises are talking about 80 million users. Those numbers are so far away from, like if you look at the TAM, like the total addressable market of music creation software, it, you know, it's a few single percents of that huge pile of people. And the
Mm,
reason I bring that up is I think now more than ever before, people are going through these funnels, which, by the way, going back to what we talked about earlier, like these guys are pros. Like they are so much better than anything else that we experienced in the music software business, in my opinion, in terms of bringing people in and getting them to use the product. Whether it's good or bad, that's for someone else to say. But I'm just like stating a fact, in my opinion. Like getting that amount of people in you know um, a really new concept for music creation, I think is huge. And going back to, what we talked about, like the future, I think those people, their first experience, if you think about it, their first experience with producing music or writing music or creating is through prompts and these kind of new ways of making music. I do not think that a large percent of them are going to, just move from the ease of use of Suno to the complexity of downloading Logic Pro, downloading 20 different plugins, installing them, license music,
I
you know.
I totally agree with you. I think I had this very reflection 2 days ago. I was at a birthday party and there was like 4 performers performing. It's one of my friends, great, a lot of people there. And I was like, "Oh, I wanna go back into sort of, performing again, maybe just for fun. I wanna write a song, release a song." Like, it's been a lot of years since I did that. I was reflecting, "Okay, if I were to do that, how would I do it?" I was thinking about, like, I still have Logic on my computer, but honestly, I can't be bothered finding all the plugins. Like, I was like, I don't wanna go back into that workflow, like, I can do it, but then let me let me research what tools out there where I can automate a lot of this process. And even me with, like, 5 years ago, I would be a dedicated pro in this. And now, because I'm so used to sort of the accessibility of vibe coding or, vibe creating music, I'm like, "No, there must be a better way than going back and" even I can't even be bothered using an hour to find all my plugins, which I've paid, too much money on over the years. And so for me, that's lost. That's a lost, work process. I'm not gonna dedicate time to relearn it. And for me, that's gonna maybe take a day or 2. For someone else, that's gonna take years, right?
Yeah.
So that's the problem when I can't be bothered to relearn something I used to be a pro at. Like, how do we expect newcomers to want to spend time doing that?
Yeah, and I think, I think that's exactly the thing is, like, once you experience the ease of use of something like Suno and the immediacy of it, then going back to opening, a traditional DAW and plugins is, not easy. And I think where the future is going, in my opinion, um, is some plugin companies are going to make the leap into, you know, online-based, DAWs. I think that 1, 2, maybe 3 DAWs that are online are going to win the war, so to speak, and transition people
Mm.
into their new way of doing stuff online. I think, FL Studio is doing an amazing job right now, and their online DAW is really good, in my opinion.
Mm.
Um, and, they're first to market in terms of, the other traditional DAWs. There's going to be others. There's companies like, there's a company called Sesh. Have you heard of them?
I've I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so Sesh does, like, online an online DAW that's also kinda like Figma in the sense that you can work on it simultaneously with multiple people at once.
Mm.
Their user experience, I think, is the best. Uh, I love using that thing. It's really fun. I know the founder, Matt, he's a really talented person, and um, that's where the world is going. I think we're going to see online DAWs become the standard, and I think some plugins are gonna exist for sure in those DAWs. But, maybe, in a few years, the user can generate a plugin based on his song or based on his, prompt, etcetera. I'm not sure necessarily there would be a need for plugin companies. But the thing is, like, what is interesting is, like, if you compare plugin companies to labels, I think the smart plugin companies understand that, you know, uh, it's much more than just the technology or the assets that they own, but rather, um, what they kind of represent. So the group of people that like Safari enjoy using our products not because, they have to, but because they're fun to use. And hopefully we can transition them into, um, you know, other offerings that may, you know, be appealing to this new world of online DAWs and prompts and everything, if that makes sense. And that's in many ways what we're doing. I mean, we're releasing a new AI tool called Meow Chain in a few days. It's coming out on Wednesday. So we're trying to kind of look into to building those new tools that are fun to use, but also make more sense in the world that we're living in right now.
I have a question sort of before we sort of round up the episode is you've built a company that now has 170,000 users and obviously you're doing something right. That's for sure. But still it's cost you 3 years and I know it's also been a journey and the pursuit of, for example, trying to raise capital has also been difficult and you also know sort of where this is heading, I think, for your industry with like a good deal of both curiosity and anxiety and uncertainty. Do you think it's worth it to build a company in this day and age within the plugin space?
I don't want to be like I don't want to end the episode in a pessimistic way, but the honest answer is no. I don't think it's worth it. Uh, but here's like my point of view is I'm really having fun doing it. Like I really enjoyed the you know the path in which we chose to go uh, through, and so I believe that as long as you're intrigued and curious and have fun during the process, then it is worth it. But from a business
Mm.
standpoint, I think that there's so many opportunities right now, that I wouldn't necessarily say this is a good one.
Mm. I'm not an expert in the field. I've done my fair share of research on it lately, though. Like where I see the opportunities is fully utilizing legacy companies and that's been under distributed and you know make sure that gets out further. Um, But you need to be really smart in order to become relevant in the future. Like, you need to do things really, really differently than the status quo in order to make this work. And I do think you're doing that, by the way.
Thank you.
So I think there's validity to your path, even though you say it might not be worth it to build a new company. But I think my perspective, with my limited knowledge, though, I think that there's definitely a future for Safari Audio, especially talking with you multiple times. I see you have something that most founders in this space don't have that I speak with. And I think even though path is difficult, I think that's what's necessary in order to actually survive and build something great. What do you think is your dream scenario for Safari Audio? Like, capitalistically, what do you think you can get from this?
Um, Again, like really, really good question. And thank you for the kind words. I mean, it's hard sometimes to see it, from the perspective of where I'm at. Uh, Honestly, I think, for Safari, uh, in a financial way, I think, and we had this conversation before. I think there are ways to optimize and grow the company way further than where it's at right now. Um, and I'm doing my best to figure out what those things that need to be done happen. And I also think that if I'm speaking honestly, that Safari has a lot to offer bigger legacy brands. And you mentioned an example. You didn't say a name, but like an example of a legacy brand that kind of didn't do a lot of marketing or optimization to their sales funnel, etc. Um, and I think there are many brands that I can think of that we would definitely bring enormous value to either in an acquisition or a partnership, way to join a bigger company. So that's another thought that I have definitely on my mind right now.
Mm. And I think, it's been a space with rich consolidation, the plugin space, maybe not always successfully so, but there has been a lot of activity of consolidation and buying other companies. Maybe not the biggest exits ever heard of, but they're definitely there, and some of them can be lucrative. So it does make sense still. So yeah. Well, no, thank you so much for the talk. We didn't get too much into the founder journey, but maybe we should cover that another time again. But what I think is incredibly interesting is this space because it's on so much disruption, and there are going to be winners. The biggest question is like, where's that going to come from? What angle is that? And I think for sort of investors or sort of more PE style, I don't know how many of those will be listening to this podcast. I do think there is a real big opportunity in a mixture of what both you and I just touched, like marketing, distribution, brand. There's still an audience, and there will still be an audience for a few years. It's probably not going to take a long time before that's completely eradicated. And there's still a lot to be won there. But I think already now being very, very proactive of trying to pursue what's next is necessary for these to still exist in a few years. So I think we both agree on that as well. I'm really excited to follow your journey because I know that you've been quite, um, what's it called? Uh, quite focused on being relevant. So I'm very excited to see what you guys will try to do these next couple of years in order to stay relevant.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And it's always great to talk to you.
Thanks, Alan. Have a great day.